with all the demonstrations. Now it's time for us to move to the learning path 8, implement API management. Now, implement API management has only one topic, which is explore API management. After completing this, you will get to know what is API management service, why we needed it, how to use that, and how to configure that. What is the importance of API management service in the communication between the client and the API that you want to expose it to the outside world in a controlled manner. So when I'm talking about discover the API management service, so let me read it, then I'll explain it. Because when I read it, right, you might not be able to understand what it is on the slide, but when I explain it with a diagram, the things will be very clear. So the role of API management. API management provide core functions to ensure a successful API program through developer participation, business insight, analysis, security, and protection. Each API consists of one or more operations, and each API can be added to one or more products, right? And to work with the API management, you will get various components like gateway. API is a API management service provide you a gateway. It has a Azure. It can be managed with a portal, and there is a developers portal inside. Okay, that's what I read. Now I'm going to explain that to you, right? So that you can understand the other slides as well, which will be coming. So let's say I have created an API. API is application programming service. So it's employee management service, employee management API, which has methods called add employee, add, which is expecting an employee object. And you have some logic, which is talking to some database. Then view employee. You are expecting an ID and the business logic. Let's say these are the two methods. You can have more as well. Now you have your clients, maybe a website, or maybe APIs, other applications. Now you want that these clients can call these APIs. So every API has a URL, right? URL 1. So you can give this URL 1 to the customers. And with that URL, they can talk to your API. They can send a request. But the problem here is there is a tight coupling between the client and the API, because client knows where the API is and API knows which client is calling them. Now the problem is, if by any way this URI need to be changed, so I have to tell all the clients, which is not possible for me. As well as whenever the request comes, so I need to validate the request and authorize the request. I need to check the authorization. So I need to check the validation, perform validation on the data, plus I need to go with authorization. So for that, I have to write a logic in every single method, how to validate the data, how to authorize the request, so which makes my application heavy. As well as in future, if requirement changes, I have to change my code and I have to deploy it again. So that's a problem, big problem. That first of all, there is a tight coupling. Then I have to write a logic for authorization and validation in my every method. And then if things changes, I have to change the code and deploy my application again. So that's a big problem. So I thought about, is there any service which can help me out in overcoming from this problem? So I say that, yes, we have a service called API management service, which sits in between your client and your API. So this API has a URL, but it is private. It is not exposed to the outside world. So I have an API management service. This API management service says that I have APIs collection. Now, whatever APIs you will create here are called front-end APIs. Front-end APIs, because they are exposed to the outside world. And these are called back-end APIs. Back-end APIs. Now I can create a new API. So when I'm creating a new API, it will give me different options depending on what API I want to communicate with. WSDL files are there for old web services. I can connect to the use OpenID using a Swagger file. Right. So I can connect to Azure Functions, Logic Apps. So I use this Swagger file of this particular employee management service to create this API. So it will create a new API called employee management with the same name. management. And it will have the add method, which takes a parameter of employee type. And then we have a view method, view employee, which takes an ID, but they don't contain the logic. They are just forwarding your request to the backend. Now, client will call this API. This API has a URL. So now clients are calling that URL. And then this URL is checking which method you are calling. And based on that, your request is forwarded to the backend. So in this case, client is not aware about the APIs and APIs are not aware about the client. So I can change the mapping at any time. As well as because my request is coming to the API management, I can perform a lot of things. I can perform authorization. I can perform validation, right? So I can do a lot of things here. I can handle the errors. I can handle the caching here without writing any code. So that's the beauty of the API management service. Now, when I want to work with the API management service, right? So there are a few things that you should know that we have the policies. So we have to work with policies. Policies basically are XML files. XML files, right? Which contain four main areas. So the policies have four sections: inbound section, outbound or backend first, BACK, backend, and we have outbound, and on error. So I can add the policies in between. Now in inbound. So how these policies are executed. So when any request comes to the method, before this method forward your request, inbound policies are checked. Inbound policies are checked. And then before it calls the method, right? Before it reaches here, the backend policies are checked. And then when return result is returned and the return result is given back to the customer, right? So I can work with outbound policy. Like here, I can do some caching. I can do some data transformation, and then I can give it to the client. And when you are submitting a request, and if any error occurs here, so on error is called. It skip all the further processes. So these are the different phases that are handled by the policies. So now you know about policies. Now another interesting thing that when we are talking about API management, I went into the API section and create a new API called my or employee management. Maybe I'm creating another one called tours management. And they have their own method one, method two, right? It has method A, method B, right? Now, these I'm working in a development environment. Developer cannot use it in their application. So if I want to expose it to the outside world, so within the API management, there is another section called products. Products. Product is like a folder. It is like a container which I can create. So I can create a product called free, and another is paid. Free, basically, when I create the product, it must be published and it must be open for any API, which can be called directly. And paid basically has to be published so that people can communicate with that. And it needs a license. Means subscription is required. If you want to access the APIs of it, you need to subscribe for that. Subscription required. Now you can say that this API is free, right? For 1 month, let's say that, or totally free. So I will add this API into the free product. This is free for 1 month, but after 1 month, people can buy it or maybe directly buy it. So it will be available in both. Now, This product, once your API is in the free or paid, like in the products, so developer can test it and then use it in their application. So developer can create a client application, and from from that application, they can actually communicate with the APIs that are in these products, and then they can access the APIs. So that is the beauty of it. Now we have permissions, right? So we have groups here. So we have groups. We can create groups. So we can create admin group, and we can grant certain permissions what admin can do. We can create a developers group, what developers can do. We can create a guest group, so what guests can do, right? So group will define the permissions which can be allocated to the respected team. So this is the major important thing. And last but not the least, if any request comes from that application or any application to any of the API, right? So this application has to prove the authenticity. So every product will generate a subscription key, subscription key, key one, key two. So in the header part of the request, you have to provide this key so that your product can verify the request is coming from trusted source and they allow them to communicate further. So that is the idea behind it. Now, if you look into this slide, right, it will make more sense to you. Now, developers portal is the portal that developers can use to see how many APIs are there, how many products are there, what APIs are into, what methods are there, how to call them, which method is called, how to call a particular method, what parameters we need, what result they are working, everything is going fine. And they will even get a code that they can use it in their application. Right. So that is the beauty of it. So I told you about products. I told you about groups and what the permissions developers has. I just told you about developers portal and the policies. Now we talk about the gateway role. As I discussed with you with my diagram, the API gateway sits in between your service and the client. It acts as an intermediator. It What is the role of the intermediator? It acts as a reverse proxy. So it gets the request, do some manipulations on that, forward that request to the backend service. If everything goes fine, get the result, and then provide that result to the client. It can authenticate a request, it can authorize a request that whether the request has certain parameters like certificate, valid certificate. If it is, then forward it, otherwise error will be thrown. I can configure that how many requests per minute or per second can be sent to the API gateway for a particular service. So I can configure that as well, right? So all these things are done with the policies. If I want to cache the data, when the result comes, before returning it to the client, I want to cache it. So I can work with the policies. So authentication, authorization, right? Routing, offloading, caching, logging, everything is done with the help of policies. So as I discussed with you, potential issues when deploying an API without gateway. So the very first diagram, that if you're not using gateway, so what is the problem? You lead to a complex client code. So client needs to know where your API is, how to call them, how to pass parameters and everything. There is a tight coupling between the client and the backend service. If one thing changed, second thing will get affected by that. And single operation may need to call multiple services to achieve the goal. And the API must be public facing so that people can call it. And we can expose our service over the friendly protocol like HTTP or HTTPS. Now, when I implement this API gateway, it will act as an intermediator, which will route your traffic between your client and the service, right? It can get the request, aggregate it, and call multiple individual services, right? It can cache the data. It can perform authorization. So we have cross-cutting concerns like security, logging, monitoring. All these things can be configured centrally. So that is the beauty of the API gateway. Now, the policies, as I was talking about, policy is an XML file where you can configure that how you want to authenticate a request, authorize a request, how to perform caching, right? How to restrict a particular IP address, how to restrict number of requests that can be sent, right? how to validate the JWT token that is sent by the client to access the resource. So all these things can be done with the help of policies. And policies are divided into those categories: inbound, backend, outbound, and on error policies. These sections are there, right? Now, one thing which I would like to talk about this policy is the policies basically are defined at different levels. Let's see the practical of it, then you will understand it. Now, API management service takes, if you are going with the developers portal, right? Let me go with API management service. So when you click create API management service, you provide the details like subscription, resource group, region, what should be the name of this resource, right? In which organization you're working with, email ID of the administrator. But the most important thing is your pricing tier. So you can choose the pricing tier. Like developers, there is no service level agreement. Basic, you will get this level of service level agreement. And so consumption based model is basically, it is not going to create a dedicated resource. Whenever the request will come, it will manage the resources accordingly. Right. Now, if you're going with a consumption-based model, your API management service can be created in 10 to 15 minutes. But if you are choosing any other service, it will take 40 to 45 minutes to create the API management service, right, running. So that's the reason I have already created this service for you so that we can save some time. So I went to the homepage and I click on API management service and I called it a name cloud. Sorry, it is a mistake. I call it Cloud Wheel. It has to be Cloud Week API. Okay, it has to be unique. Now, this is the look and feel of this service. Now, here you can see that I have the APIs section. The first main section is APIs. Now, whenever you are working with API section, there is one API by default created for you, that is Echo API. And when you click on it, it will tell that this API has methods. So when you select this Echo API, you have not selected any method, so nothing is in front end. So front end is blank. So it shows that you have not selected any method. So it says that this API is mapped to this backend API. Now, if you select any method here, so it highlights that now front end has something. So it shows that you are now currently working with a method. So when somebody will want to call that, they will specify the base URI / resource, right, with a put command, with a put HTTP verb. And when they do it, then it will going to call the backend API, specific method in it, right? Now, the policies, we can define the policies at a method level. So because my method is selected, so I can do this. When I add a policy here, it is for that selected method. But if I click all operations, so there is no operation selected. So when I add a policy, it is for the specific API, right? But if I click on the all APIs, so whenever I make some changes in this policy, means it is applicable, that rule is applicable to all the APIs in it. As well as when I go to the products, each product has its own policy. So hierarchy is very simple. Hierarchy is very simple that first of all APIs, then product one, product two. This has API one, it has API two, and it might have API three. Now it has a method one, it has method one and method two, and it has method one. So I can define the policy here. Policy one means each method can have its own policy, first level. Second level is API level, policy two, policy two, policy two. Then here I have, don't confuse this with this. This is a product. So we can say policy three at a product level, policy three, and policy four. So policy four, if you add any rule here, then that rule is applicable to all APIs, no matter in which product they are. But if you make any policy here, so that policy is only applicable to all the APIs that belongs to that product. And if you make changes here, so it means that that policy is applicable to all the methods in that. And whatever you make change here, it is only for that method. So that is a hierarchy. Now, whenever you call a method, so first of all, the policy of that particular method is executed. Right. So let's say inbound. Now in the inbound, you have created a rule, like some policy, rule 1. Now this rule is specific to the method, so this get executed. But there is no way by which it can execute the parent policy. So if you want to execute a parent policy, then you have to use a base keyword. So you are telling in your method policy that first of all execute my logic, then call my base, means it's this policy. In that policy also it will check for the inbound, and then if you have written base, it will go to the parent, and base will redirect your request to the parent. If you don't use base, means it will never going to call the parent policy. Now you can control where you want base. Base should be after executing your policy or before executing your policy, right? Or rules, or maybe in between. So you can control in the order of the policies that you need to execute. And that is what they're trying to show you here, right? So you have policies, inbound, backend, outbound, on error, and you can add your own policies. And base keyword will decide that in which priority the parent policy need to be executed. So there are so many policies that you can work with, like control flow, forward request, limit concurrency, retry. So many policies are there. Let me show you a small example of that. So here we have policies. So I'll just show you one example to create an API and I add a policy. So I add an API. So I click on Open API. I specify the Swagger file that is given by Microsoft as a sample. And I say that this is a display name, internal name. It can be accessed with HTTP and HTTPS. This is a base URI. I don't want to keep it in any product at present. I just click create. So as soon as it will going to create, it will going to have the API with me. So the API will be listed here. So demo conference API. And now you can see that when I click on it, it has methods. So get speakers. So I have a get speakers. I selected that get speaker. I can add a policy here. So add a policy. There is a policy editor where I can create a policy with XML version, or I can do it graphically. So let me show you graphically. I click add policy, which you want. I want rate limit. So it means that I want to I want to make 2 calls within 30 seconds, or let's say 20 seconds. Within 20 seconds, only 2 requests can be made for this method. I save this. So it has created the policy for me. Now here you can see that the editor says that, first of all, call the immediate parent and then come back to me. Right. Okay. Let me just run the test it. So you can click on get speakers, click on test, and then you can see you are calling it once. It gets successfully executed. You get the result. Success. Second time is also success. Third time, it will give you too many requests. So you have to wait for certain time, right? 11 seconds. Right. This policy, this is only applicable for this. This is not applicable for any other method. Right. If you want that same policy should be applicable for all the methods, then you have to remove this from the method level and put that it into all operations. So hierarchy need to be set accordingly, right? So you can control at what level you want this policy. So I can delete it from here, and then I can go to all operations and I can add the policy there. So I can add a policy there. That's the idea behind it. Now products, I have created my APIs and it is working well. I have tested it. Now I want that people can use it. Developers can use it. So I'll go to the product section. So I can add products, or I can use the 2 products which comes by default. So I have 2 products, but if you want to add, you can add a product. I show you one. So I click free product, give it a description, right? And then it should be published, but it do not need subscription. It's free. So I click create. So when this product is created, you can get to the product. You can get into the product. You can see, you can have the policies for that product level as well. And you can add APIs. Same API can be available in more than one product. So it is added here. So every product says that if you want to call my APIs, then I have a subscription key. So I have a subscription key that you can use in your request to call that, right? Now, if you have 100 products, it is not possible for me to check which subscription key belongs to which product. So I'll go to the subscription section, and then I can see all the products and their keys at one place. So that is the beauty of it. I can just say show. So I can check for all products for which subscription keys are there. So that is the first part. Now, the last thing which I would like to discuss with you is the developers portal. So we have the portal overview, and we have the developers portal. We have two portals available, latest one and the old one. So I just want to show you the old one because it is fast to show. Functionality is same in both the cases. So as a developer, I can go here, I can see which APIs are there. I can click on APIs. I can say there are two APIs. Oh, okay, let me test it. So I click on this one. It has all these methods. I can check the method that I need to see which one is working. So I can say get speakers. If it open that, if I want to see how to call it, so it will give you the details about it, as well as I can see this code in different languages, how to use that code to call that. So complete code is there. So I can use this code, but before that, I can try that to see everything is working fine or not. So I can just go here and you can see in my request, I am passing the key here. I'm passing the parameter that is basically the key, subscription key. I'll show you that. Just give me a minute. So let me go back to the get speaker method. So you can see that here. Just give me 1 sec, please. Right. So here I can add a header and I can provide the key that is a specific key that will going to specify the subscription key that I would like to use, right? So subscription key has to be passed into the parameter, right? So otherwise I won't be able to use it. So that is something that we should know, that how to play with this portal. Now let me just check one thing. If I go to the APIs, I select the API that I have created. I'll go to the test. Even I can test it here. But once it is tested, then I'll go to the product. Then my developers can open the developers portal and use that portal to see how to call that API, what methods are there, what parameters I need to pass, right? Everything I have to define it in my request, right? So that is the second level of testing. This is the developers testing, means the one who is creating it. And this portal, which I just shown it to you, right, is used by the developer who want to use it in their client application to check whether these APIs are working as expected or not. Similarly, I have a product section. So I can go to a particular product and then click on that API, right, and see how to call them. It will take you to the same page and you can test your API accordingly. So that is what API management service is all about. Now, I shown you one policy, right, but you can add other policies as well. So just taking you back last time, and I click on the design part, and when I click this editor, right, so you can add your policies here, right? You can add your policies here, and whatever you will add it graphically, it will add it accordingly into the XML editor. So you can see that the policy is added here. Similarly, you can have other policies as we were talking about, right? So control flow, forward request, limit concurrency, and so. So you can add the policy in the right place, inbound, outbound, depending on which policy is used where. So they are just showing you one example that I told you about the subscription keys, right? I told you about next part, that is how to check your subscription keys. We have seen that practically. What is the use of it as well? So whenever you are testing your methods, so you can see that in your request, you must pass header OCP-APIM-subscription key and the value of it. So this is the key value pair that you will going to add in your header part of your request, right? And the value of it is coming from here, so that your API management service will trust your request. Now, if you want to check whether the request has a valid certificate, you are expecting a certificate. So you want to check whether the request has a valid certificate or not. So you can perform that as well. So you can add a choose, choose a policy. Choose basically is like if and else. So when condition is from the current request, if current request dot certificate is null, means there is no certificate with you in your request, or you have a certificate but its thumbprint is not equal to the desired thumbprint, so you will not forward it to the backend. You are returning a response from there only, forbidden, invalid certificate. Or it might be possible that you do not have a certificate, or maybe issuer ID is not the one that I have trusted with, I have a trust level with, or maybe subject name is different. Then also I can say invalid certificate. So I can check the properties of certificate in the policy, and then if it doesn't match,